coming in contact with a Gentile. So to say that there was prejudice between Jew and Gentile is to grossly understate the case. So now in Acts chapter 10, where we are this evening, we have how many verses in Acts 10? 48, so a rather long chapter. We're going to divide the chapter into 3 sections, and obviously we'll not begin to cover all this tonight. First of all, an invitation from Cornelius, verses 1 to 8, a vision for Peter, verses 9 through 23, and then a Gentile's conversion, 24 through 48. So let's begin Acts chapter 10. Angie, if you've got that, read for us verses 1 through 6.
There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. And when he observed him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. He will tell you what you must do.
Okay, thank you. Back up to verse number 1. When you try to reconcile two people, it's best to talk to them separately and privately first. And usually you talk to the person who is most ready to be reconciled, and that's what God does in this situation. He first works with Cornelius, and then he'll work with Peter. He'll work with the sinner, and then he'll work with the preacher. So again, this is occurring, keep in mind, in the city of Caesarea. Remember, there is another Caesarea in Philippi up north in the mountains. This is not that Caesarea. This is Caesarea on the Mediterranean sea coast. There is a modern city today, just about a little over a mile north of the ruins of the city where we are in Acts the 10th chapter. It's rather small, population of only over about 5,000, a little over 5,000 people. But it is a very affluent city. Business tycoons live in what is called Caesarea today. And so there's a lot of money in this small town. They have the country's only full-size golf course. It may not interest anybody, that's just a bit of trivia, but there is a modern Caesarea. It's a very wealthy city. That's in the general location of where this Caesarea is now, where we are. To the Jews, we know that Jerusalem would have been to them the most important city in Israel. But to the Romans, Caesarea was the most important city in Israel because that was the headquarters of the Roman officials. Roman officials would go to Jerusalem on special occasions, and that is why Pilate was there when Jesus was crucified, the feast of Passover. But they did reside in the city of Caesarea. Caesarea had been rebuilt by Herod the Great, and he named it after Caesar Augustus, and thus the name Caesarea. You get Caesar from Caesarea. And it then was a beautiful city. They say there was a lot of marble streets, marble structures, and so affluence obviously back in that day. Well, Cornelius, he is a Roman soldier, and he is stationed in Caesarea. He has a Latin name, so he is obviously a Gentile. Some would say, you would think that a soldier would be the least likely to be interested in spiritual matters. Soldiers oftentimes are known for being rough and rugged, but Cornelius was an exception. He had a really good heart. All right, so he's a centurion. What is a centurion? If you drop the U-R-I-N off centurion, you have cent. C-E-N-T. A cent is 1/100th of a dollar, correct? Takes 100 cents or pennies to make a dollar. So CENT refers to 100. Century refers to what? 100 years. CENT is the 100. Century, 100 years. A centipede has how many legs? That's a trick question there. And most of them don't have near 100 legs. Some of them actually have 177 legs, but I think they named it that just because there were so many legs. A millipede does not have 1,000,000 legs, even though that prefix means 1,000,000. But cent, by and large, means 100, so he was a fellow in charge of 100 soldiers. Now, his particular regiment was called the Italian. King James says Italian band. We're not talking marching band. We're talking about a military division. I think Angie read regiment. Your translation may have cohort. So band, regiment, cohort. A band or regiment or cohort consisted of between 600 and 1,000 men. A Roman legion consisted of 6,000 men. So you've got different divisions or battalions of the Roman army, much like we would have in our army today. Now, if you were in the Roman army, you were usually a Roman citizen. You signed up to fight for 20 years. When your 20 years was up, they would give you some land and a sizable chunk of money. This would entice men to sign up for service in the Roman army. If you were a non-Roman citizen, you could also sign up for service in the Roman army. You were called an auxiliary, and you had to serve for 25 years. At the end of your 25 years, you were granted full Roman citizenship. Full Roman citizenship, and that was a prize back in that day. You may not think much of it today, but that was a prize back then. And those were incentives to join the Roman army. And the Roman army then, we're told it was something to see. They did wield a lot of power. So these men in the Italian regiment, I wonder where they came from. Greece? England?
Italy.
Probably Italy, right? If they're from the Italian regiment, you would think they came from Italy. That's not a trick question at all. They were recruits from Italy, and they made up this particular division. And Cornelius was in charge of 100 of these men. He was a Roman military officer. But more than that, and much more important than that, he was a good man, right? I think everybody in here, probably everybody in the world, would say it'd be hard to find a better man than Cornelius was. Verse 2, he was devout. Again, keep in mind he's a Roman soldier. And he's living at an atmosphere that would not be conducive to really being a good person. We're told that bribery was commonplace in the Roman army, and that was just a way of life. But he was a man who was honest in a dishonest world, some have said. He rose above his circumstances and was a good person in spite of where he lived and what he did. So many times we hear people blaming their environment for why they turned out the way they did, but he tells us you can rise above your environment. You can be better even if everybody else around you has been or is bad. So he's devout. He's a deeply religious man. He feared God. Most of the Romans served pagan gods, and their lord was Caesar, but not Cornelius. He believed in the God of the Old Testament. He was what we would call a God-fearer. He feared God. He was a God-fearer. The one thing Cornelius had not done to become a Jewish proselyte, there was only one thing he needed to do. One thing. Circumcision. That's the only thing that kept him from being a proselyte to the Jewish religion. He was a God-fearer, but he had not become circumcised. When we get to Acts chapter 11, we'll see that he and his household were uncircumcised men. But a religious man, a man who feared God, and not only did Cornelius fear God, but who else? His family, right? All of his house, his family, maybe even include his servants. So he taught his family about the God of heaven, and they were God-fearers also. Much like what Old Testament man who said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua, you do what you want to do, but I'll vouch for me and my house. We're going to serve the Lord. That's the mindset that Cornelius had. We're going to serve God. What is it about Cornelius that made him such a good man? He was a generous man, wasn't he? A very generous man. King James says he gave much alms to the people. What are alms? A-L-M-S. Another word for alms. Contribution, money, any type of monetary, financial gift or food gift. These were charitable deeds. I think one translation renders that he did many charitable deeds. He was concerned about people in need, is what this means. And not only concerned, but he gave. He gave much alms to the people. You may have a version that says to the Jewish people. The Jewish people. And in Acts, the people often refers to the Jews, but this does not necessarily have to be limited to Jews. It could include Gentiles. Anybody who was in need, Cornelius tried to meet that need. What else about Cornelius tells us he was a good man? He prayed. Every now and then? Always. He prayed to God always. He practiced what Paul later preached, pray without ceasing, okay? He was a man who constantly went to God in prayer. He believed in the power of prayer. Look down at verse 22 of the same chapter, Acts 10:22. We have something else about Cornelius that tells us he was a good man. And again, this is those talking to Peter. Peter has arrived. We won't get there tonight, but they give the report of Cornelius. He's a centurion. He's a just man. He's one who fears God. And notice this: of good report among all the nation of the Jews. Why is that so remarkable? The Jews respected Cornelius, who is a Gentile, and on top of that, a Roman soldier. Usually Jews hated Roman soldiers. Cornelius, the exception. So that gives us an idea. For him to be respected by the nation of the Jews, he must have been a really good man to earn their respect and for them to look up to him. In spite of all these characteristics, what about Cornelius? Is he saved? He's lost. Now the world would say, you know this man's going to heaven. If anybody's going to heaven, Cornelius is going to heaven. He fears God. He prays always. He gives the shirt off his back. Everybody loves Cornelius, even among the Jews. You know that this good moral man is a saved man. Cornelius wasn't lost because he was a good man. Why was he lost? What one word? S-I-N. Sin. He was a good man, but he was not a sinless man. Paul says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and they all would include Cornelius. That's why Cornelius is lost. Had he had no sin, he would not have been lost. Now we know for a fact that Cornelius was lost if we look in chapter 11, verse 14. Acts 11:14. This is reviewing what happened in chapter 10. But again, this is speaking to Cornelius, who shall tell thee words whereby thou and all thy house shall be saved. Before he heard those words and obeyed those words, he was not saved. He is lost in spite of being about the best man on the planet. Somebody said that Cornelius, before his conversion, was a lot better man than some of us who are Christians after conversion. And that puts us to shame. And that may be true. He is a classic example of the truth that nobody is good enough to be saved by their own goodness. Nobody. The godliest person alive is a sinner in need of saving. For him to be saved, he's got to have the blood of Jesus applied to his life. And for any of that to even begin to take place, he needs to be told what to do. That's what this chapter then is all about. The Bible says on Judgment Day there will be a lot of surprises. And one great surprise is going to be that a lot of good people are going to be lost. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? And in your name have cast out demons, and in your name done many wonderful works. And Jesus will say to them, depart, I never knew you. And there's no doubt that they did these things, but they were not children of God. They had not obeyed the gospel. That's the condition Cornelius is in, and that's the condition a whole lot of folks in our world are in as we speak tonight. Well, we've got to rectify that, God says, and so in verse 3, Cornelius has a vision. He's not imagining this. This is not just something that he dreams up. The King James doesn't use the word clearly, but many of the newer translations use the word clearly. There's no mistaking that he actually sees what he sees in this vision. All right, it's about the 9th hour of the day. That would be what time? About 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, our 9th hour of the day would be what time in this country? What hour of the day would be our 9th hour? That's a hard one. 9 o'clock. You start counting at midnight to 9, you got 9, but they started counting at daybreak. On average around 6, that would vary, but on average around 6. And so the 9th hour of the day, if you count up, that's going to be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the Jewish hours of prayer. In this vision, Cornelius saw what? An angel, right? In this vision, he saw an angel of God coming to him. Which makes us ask, how did he know what an angel of God looked like? Had he seen one before? In the Bible, we know that there were men, or there were angels who looked just like men. Abraham, remember Abraham, when the angels came to him in the heat of the day and he prepared a meal for them, they looked just like men, but they were angels. But there's something about this angel that's different than a man, right? If this is just the ordinary appearance of a man, Cornelius isn't going to be scared out of his wits, correct? There's something about this particular angel that looks different than an ordinary human. The angel knows who Cornelius is, correct? How do we know that? Calls him by name. Okay, he knows his name. So angels know who we are, and they can talk. He calls Cornelius by name, and Cornelius, verse 4, looked on him, stared at him. One renders this, he was afraid. One translation says he was in terror. Again, he's scared out of his wits, and who would not have been? There was something about the appearance of this angel that brought about fear in the heart of this man. Some type of, he knows he's not looking at a human. He knows he's looking at a supernatural being. And there's something about that that causes fear within him. So he's been addressed. It's expected that he responds. And he says, "What is it, Lord?" A term of respect for this one infinitely superior to what he is. And the angel says, Cornelius, God knows about your praying, and God knows about your generosity. Your prayers and your generosity are come up for a memorial before God. And these, of course, are Old Testament terms. We read in the Old Testament, whenever they offered an animal sacrifice, they would burn that, and the smell of that burnt offering was a sweet aroma to God. It may not seem like that way to us, but to God that was a sweet aroma. That is, God was pleased with what they did in sacrificing. This tells us that God is pleased up to now with the life of Cornelius. He is a God-fearing man, a praying man, a generous man, and God is aware of that, the angel says. But there's something lacking. Verse 5, here's what you're to do. You take some of your men and send them to Joppa. Who's in Joppa? Peter's in Joppa. Tell those men to call for Simon. He's also called Peter. Peter's still there. We ended with Peter back in chapter 9 when he performed miracles of healing Aeneas and raising Dorcas from the dead. He's still there in Joppa, so you send men to get him. He's still there with Simon a tanner. The angel knows all this. He's just relaying this to Cornelius. His house is by the seaside. In other words, there may be more than one Simon. There may be more than one Simon a tanner. You get the one whose house is by the seaside. And go get him, and he's going to come and tell you what you need to do. You may have a version that leaves out the end of verse 6. Many of them will end with the word seaside or the word sea. But when you compare this with the rest of the accounts of this, obviously Cornelius was going to be told the message of God, and then he'll be told what to do. So there are things that Cornelius must do, and Peter will tell him the things that he needs to do to be what? To be saved, okay? All right, Tanya, verses 7 and 8.
And when the angel who spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier from among those who waited on him continuously. So when he had explained all these things to them, he sent them to Joppa.
So the angel leaves. Cornelius catches his breath. And he calls, it does exactly what he was told, right? I mean, he's a military man. He's used to giving others orders. Now he's taking orders from God through the angel, and he is very respectful, and he is ready to respond. He's not insulted. We talk to people today about the Bible and the need of salvation. Some people get insulted. Who are you to say that I'm lost? Who are you to imply that I'm lost? Why do I need saving? I'm a good person. Cornelius isn't like that. He is a man of humility, and he is willing now to follow the orders of this angel, and I'm sure the angel's presence helped him in that decision. So he sends how many servants? 2, and what? A soldier. So 3 are going. Why the soldier goes, maybe for protection, we don't really know. Notice that the soldier is called what? Devout. Which may imply that he too is a God-fearer. That Cornelius has had an effect on him. And he's made a difference in his life. But in any event, Cornelius does not waste any time sending these men. It is after what time of the day? It's after 3. It's at least after 3. How much after 3 we don't know. They're going to Joppa, which is about 30 miles away. You can get in your car and travel 30 miles in a matter of minutes, right? Well, they don't have a car, maybe a horse, maybe walking. It's going to take them several hours to get from Caesarea to Joppa. But they travel, and they're going to cover this ground mostly by night to get there when they do the next day. Now, a couple of questions before we go on to verse 9. Number 1, I think we've covered this before, but to us it would seem logical for the angel to simply tell Cornelius what? What to do to be saved. Did the angel not know? Was it that the angel didn't have a clue what a man must do to be saved? Remember that Jesus did not tell Saul what to do to be saved, right? Who would tell Saul? Ananias, okay? And remember, the Spirit did not tell the eunuch what to do to be saved. Who did? Philip, okay? God does not do for man what man can do. And God's great commission was not given to angels. God's great commission was given to men. Men are supposed to be telling men. Humans telling humans what to do to be saved. Christians to tell non-Christians what to do to be saved. And that was Peter's mission then, and that is our mission today. To try to do exactly that. Another question we might ask, why did Peter have to be the man? Recall that Philip also went to Caesarea, Acts chapter 8. He'll be there in Acts 21. Why could Philip not have told Cornelius what to do instead of going 30 miles away and getting Peter? And we really don't know the answer to that, but I would suggest this. In this case, we're talking about the conversion of a Gentile. There's going to be a lot of strife over this. That's what Acts 11 is all about, the strife that arose behind a Gentile's conversion. If you have the weight of an apostle doing this, that might help eliminate the strife that's going to arise. So that might be one reason they use Peter here maybe instead of Philip. That's just a guess on my part. But in any event, Christians need to tell non-Christians what to do to be saved.
If you think about the Paul-Peter disagreement in Galatians chapter 2, it could also be because of any of the apostles, Peter's the one who needed this the most because of his own problem in Galatians 2 of separating himself from...
Right. Sometimes the lessons, Adam's pointed out, sometimes the lessons are not learned easily. Even when we know the lesson, we lapse back, and that's what Peter's going to do. So this may have been, as Adam said, very much as much for Peter as anybody here, why he is chosen. So the sinner, Cornelius, is ready. Now God must get who ready? Peter, the preacher. Okay, got to work on the preacher now. We got the sinner ready. Now God says, I've got to work on the preacher. I've got to work on this gnat up here that's flying around. Adam, if you will, read for us 9 through 16. How about that, 9 through 16?
On the next day, as they went on their journey and drew near unto the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And he became very hungry and would have eaten the law they made ready and fell into a trance, and saw heaven opened and a certain vessel descending unto him as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. Keep going.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that'll just stop there if you want. We won't get that far anyway, don't think. So they left sometime after 3. The next day, they're coming close to Joppa, about 30 miles. To cover that distance, they would have had to have traveled most of the night to get there by this particular time. All right, Peter is on the housetop doing what? Praying. You drive up here to the church building and see Wayne on the housetop, you're going to think, oh, Wayne is out of his mind, right? Why is he on the housetop? What's Peter doing on the housetop praying? What was different about the houses then than now? Did they have pitched roofs like we have today? The roofs were what? They were flat roofs. And that served a number of purposes. They would take their fruit and dry their fruit on the flat roof. The roof actually was the coolest part of the house in the heat, especially in the evening time. You did not want to stay inside your house when it was hot. For that very reason, it's hot. When I was growing up back home, we didn't have air conditioning, and I did not want to stay inside during the summer. You stayed outside and played. That's the only way you could get cool. And so you stayed a lot of times on your roof, privacy, dry fruit, and a lot of people use the roof for prayer. The Old Testament said whenever you build a house with a flat roof, you must build a what on that roof? Ever go to the Grand Canyon? Go to the edge of the rim? What keeps you from falling off? If you go to the wrong place, you will fall off. But if you go to the public places, there's a rail there. That's what the Old Testament said you had to build a low wall around the edge of that roof simply to keep people from falling off.
Wouldn't you be charged for murder?
I think so, yeah.
You could be put to death.
Right. If you fail to provide protection for that. If you we've been to the Grand Canyon, but they didn't have the skywalk, that glass skywalk built when we went. And they, that thing juts out 70 feet, and if you fall off, you're 4,000 feet down. They got rails around that to hopefully prevent anybody. You could still climb over that to your death, but most people aren't going to do that. It's sort of funny if you've ever watched videos of people getting on that for the first time. They just don't just walk out on there like we walk out on a floor, because it's transparent. You see through the bottom. They take steps, very slow steps, and back up, take a step and back up. Is this thing going to what? It's going to fall in with me? You cannot carry your cell phone. You have to wear booties on your feet. You don't want to scratch the glass. You drop your cell phone, you might scratch the glass, and that thing costs how many millions of dollars? And I don't think you want to pay for that. But in any event, they've got rails all the way around that to keep people from falling off. My grandmother Cox, her house had a flat roof on the second story. It was the roof of the porch, and above that it was flat, and they had a door where you could actually walk out on there, but they did not have anything built around the edge. So they kept that door locked, and they gave us strict orders to never open this door and never go out on that, because for obvious reasons. So Peter's on the rooftop. He's not Santa Claus. He's up on the housetop, but he is praying. And he is praying at what hour of the day? I've lost my place. Verse 9. Sixth hour would be noon, dinner time, right? If the ninth hour is 3 p.m., the sixth hour would be 12 p.m. And he's up there, and evidently he made a custom of following the Jewish practice of praying certain prescribed times of the day. Peter's a man just like all of us are men, women, and he got hungry. King James says he was very hungry. Not just hungry, but very hungry. And he wanted something to eat. And he would have eaten. The only thing was it wasn't ready. Dinner wasn't ready. Lunch wasn't ready. They were making the lunch ready. Evidently, this may have been a gathering spot for Christians to come to Simon's house and hear Peter and so forth. Somebody's getting the meal ready, and Peter's waiting on that. While he's waiting, he is praying, and he falls into a trance, verse 10 says. And this would be, I guess, similar to a vision. It's not a dream. It's not imagination. This is a God-given message, a God-given visual message to Peter. Verse 11, he saw the sky or the heavens open, and a certain vessel or object descending to him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners, or a great sheet let down by its four corners on the earth. Was this a great sheet? No, as it had been, something like a great sheet. This is a trance anyway, but this is something that Peter sees. And in this, whatever you want to call it, sheet, some called it a tablecloth because he's about to eat. But in this sheet were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping or crawling things, and birds of the air. These creatures would have been representative of every kind of animal on earth, some clean, some unclean. And so, verse 13, there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter." This tells us Peter was either on his knees praying or on his face praying, prostrate on the ground. So get up, Peter, kill, which tells us the animals were what? Alive. You don't have to kill it if it's already dead. You don't kill a T-bone steak if it's right there on a frying pan. It's already been killed. So kill these animals, kill what you want, eat. In other words, I'm providing you a smorgasbord from heaven. Pick any item you want for lunch. And Peter said what? Man, I'm hungry. I'll take this and this and this. I'm not about to do this, Lord. I tell you what, when you tell God no, it's bad enough when you tell dad and mom no when you're a child. You tell God no, that's the wrong thing to say. Peter said, "Not so, Lord. Well, I've never eaten anything that is common or unholy or defiled or unclean." Number one, I'm not going to eat an unclean animal because that's against the Old Testament law. And secondly, I'm not going to eat any of these clean animals because they've touched these unclean animals and they're all unclean and defiled. So I'm not going to defile myself. I'm not going to do it. Now, we'll get to this next week, but all of this is designed to tell Peter what? About what kind of food to eat. Is that what this is about? What's it about? The gospel is for everybody, even the Gentiles. That's what point God is going to make through all of this. We'll pick up there in verse 15 then, Lord willing, next Wednesday. Acts 10:15.